So I wanted to do a sermon series, and this sermon series is on what makes up a church, and it's called Prophets, Pastors, and People. The reason I wanted to do this is because anybody's ever been in a leadership position, you think a lot about what makes groups tick. All right, how do you get the group to work as a group? How do you get to work as a team? I have found that groups that work as teams and that are successful, everybody in the group understands what their roles and responsibilities are. And all the niches or roles that need to be fulfilled in the group are actually being fulfilled. And they all work symbiotically with each other, or as best can be, okay? So each week we're going to look at individual roles that are within the church, and I call it the 3 P's of church. You got the prophet, you got a pastor, and by pastor I mean leadership, okay, not just the guy up here, but also leadership within a church. And the final week, the last week of August, is going to be on people, okay? And hopefully by the end you'll have a unique, I try and give you a unique perspective on what makes up this unique organization called a church. All right, today we're going to talk about prophets, okay? And I think this is actually the most neglected role within churches. And the reason I think it's the most neglected is because I'll put a question out to you guys. Who here plays the role of prophet at St. Luke? Does anybody know? I figured that. It's crickets right now. Nobody knows. Okay, you go to most churches, that's pretty typical. Okay, I went on the St. Luke website. I didn't find it there. I even went back to an old, I think it's a 1990s directory. I found the pastor. I found the people. I did not find any mention of who plays the prophetic role within the church in the directory, although I have some very young-looking photos of some of you inside this directory. Okay? All right. So the reason I think we don't understand this role is because we don't truly understand what prophets are within the Christian Judeo tradition. Okay. And one of the reasons we don't understand is, can we just face it? The prophets in the Bible, even though there's 30 of them, over 30 of them, and 7 of them are women, they're hard to read. They're just hard to read and understand. Many people start the prophets and then we stop because it's like decoding Shakespeare. Okay, let's just face it. And a lot of us, the best we'll do, we'll just go back and we'll pick out our favorite one-liners. All right, and so we never read them from start to finish and truly understand how they're all very similar and they all have common trends among them and what their role plays in our everyday lives, okay, especially in our churches. The hope with this message is by the end you'll understand what a prophet is, and you'll also be able to look in this congregation right now and be able to pinpoint people. I mean it. Pinpoint some people who have prophetic tendencies and hopefully value their voice, okay? So what is a prophet? The first myth about prophets is the idea that they predict the future. Hebrew prophets do not predict the future, okay? They're not fortune tellers. They are truth tellers, okay? They're defined, the actual word prophet is defined as he or she who looks at the real, who looks at reality. So a prophet is someone who looks at your church, your organization, your society, and sees the whole picture, all right, the complete picture. Sees all the different angles, all the different problems, okay, everybody's different viewpoint, and then they can see the actual problem that the group faces, and then this is the key point, they provide the solution to the problem set, okay? A prophet is not a fortune teller. They are a truth teller within your organization. They point out reality, okay? Their main weapon is going to be criticism. Prophets criticize the group, okay? They criticize the group in order to make it better. In this way, they much resemble our elected leadership sometimes, okay? They are very critical of society as a whole. They're going to be critical of the church as a whole, but they will never be critical of individuals. Think of Jesus. He doesn't go, I really don't like Pharisee Bob, all right? He says, all the Pharisees, the entire temple establishment. So whoever plays this role is going to be critical of the group as a collective, never as individuals. Now here's the key point, because I know some of you are thinking right now, I think I want to apply to be the prophet here at St. Luke. You're going to ask for the application after the service, okay? Because you're thinking, you're like, I'm really good at complaining. I'm really good at pointing out all the problems here at St. Luke. And you're like, Tim sent out a survey and you're excited. You're like, I'm going to add 40 extra pages of everything that I think is going wrong here at St. Luke. You're excited about it, okay? Here's the key point. To be the prophet, to actually fulfill this role within your organization, you can't just point out the problem. You can't just say the car has a flat tire, okay? You have to actually provide a solution to said prophet. And if you're truly a prophet chosen by God, you have the correct solution, okay? So before you go asking for that application, just think, do I have the solution to the problems the church or my organization faces, okay? That's the prophetic role. Prophets have a pure heart, okay? They work for God, all right? They have a message from God. They are pure in their message. The best way to think about this, they are unfiltered with their message. All right, so rarely are you going to find that the prophet in your organization is the leader. I'm sorry, Tim. Okay, and this isn't that Tim doesn't have a pure heart, but when you're in a leadership role, okay, any type of leadership role, when you stand up here, you can't always be unfiltered with your message, right? Because you got to think about you guys, right? And you don't want you guys to be unhappy, right? And you might have strong opinions about something, but you don't voice your strong opinions about that. The prophet is never worried about voicing their strong opinions on the situation. They just say it. It's unfiltered criticism of the group, and they will give you the solution even if you don't like the solution, okay? So rarely is the prophet going to be the guy in charge, all right? Prophets never take money. That's pretty self-explanatory. That knocks out like 90% of the people online who claim they're prophets, and then you find out they're taking millions in like financial, gifts from people, okay? They never take money. If they take money, their message is bought and paid for. This one's really important. The prophet cannot be the pastor. Just like the prophet can't be the leader of the church, the prophet can never be the clergy. All right, why? Okay? In a similar way, just like the prophet and the leader cannot be the same. A pastor, and I may tick off some pastors with this comment, but it's just the truth, okay? Pastors are service providers, just like electricians, just like plumbers, just like teachers in a society. They provide a service. Think about it. The worship leader is conducting a worship service for you, okay? During the week, the pastor provides pastoral services for you. In exchange for said service, they pass around this little plate during the service, and you put money in it if you like the service, okay? And then the church offers that money in exchange for said services. That's the very definition of a service provider. Again, just like the leader, it's not that the pastor doesn't have a pure heart here, but a pastor wants to make you happy. He wants to provide you with a worship experience that you like. All right? The pastor wants to provide you with pastoral services that you like and get something out of. It doesn't work if he doesn't have a good relationship with you. All right? That's why he can't necessarily be the prophet, because remember, there's a filter that has to be there, and the prophet is always unfiltered. But this is where we've missed the mark here with churches. There's a relationship outlined in Scripture of how the prophet and the pastor need to work together. We see it in Exodus. Moses is what? He's the prophet. And he has a brother who is what? Aaron, who's the high priest of the Israelites. Okay, Aaron makes a golden calf and everybody starts praying and worshiping to it. Why does he do that? He says it in Exodus. Because the people wanted it. He said, I gave them what they wanted. Moses comes down off the mountain, is angry, and says, you can't do that. Okay? So the way to think about this unique relationship in a church is the prophet and the pastor should work hand in hand. The prophet is quality control. He's quality assurance. Okay, whoever plays that role should be looking at the church holistically and saying, is that worship experience worth doing? Is it worth preserving? Or do we need to change it, alter it, do something different? That's the role of the prophet within your church, okay? All prophets are part of the group, but they live on the edge. They live on the edge of the inside, okay? Prophets are different. They are the other. They look different. They act differently. Good way to identify someone with prophetic tendencies in your group is they will have what you call crazy ideas. All right? They say things that are off the wall, okay? They don't engage in groupthink. All right? So if you're someone who likes to think like the herd, I don't know if the prophet role is going to be your cup of tea, okay? But they are never lone rangers. This is another myth. We think of prophets, they live on a cabin on top of the mountain. And we forget that Moses came what? He came down off the mountain to be with the people. all prophets want to be with the group. So the prophet is in your congregation sitting with you in church. They might not be in the big herd, but they're here, okay? Because all prophets value the group because they're team players. They value a group, all right? They play ball, all right? Prophets pick and choose what rules they're going to follow within your group. If you're in charge of the group, this makes them very annoying. Most leadership is going to have an antagonistic relationship with whoever plays this role. All right? Good way I have found to identify who your prophets are is if I took all of you out to the parking lot and I said, everybody go right. Those of you who just go left, all right, are good candidates for the prophetic role, okay? I have a funny feeling that most of this congregation is going to go left, all right, because we have a lot of strong opinions here, all right? We might just have a church filled with prophets, all right? Prophets pick and choose the rules they follow. Do we see this with, of course, Jesus? Jesus picks and chooses the rules he's going to follow, okay? I think of the story in Matthew chapter 8 where he heals the leper. And then he says to the leper after the man is healed, he says, go to the temple and make the required sacrifices and devotions as required by law, even though Jesus has no intention of following that law, okay? So prophets, why do they tell us to follow the laws? Why are they the classic case of do as I say, not as I do? Because prophets value groups. They value unity, and they realize that law and order keeps a group together, that it has to have rules and regulations, even though they do not feel compelled to follow them. All right, that's a very fine line. It's a very tough line to follow. That's why it's hard to be this role, okay? But they value the group. They are not anarchists. They want to keep it together, and they value the rules and regulations in a group, but they aren't going to follow them, all right? This is the big foot stomp moment. All prophets want to reform a system from within, all right? They don't want to wipe it out and start over again, all right? So if there's someone in your church who says, let's just burn it to the ground and go find a new plot of ground and make a whole new church, they're not the prophet. All prophets want to keep the group together and change it from within, all right? They value the group. They value unity. They don't want to break it apart. They see the problems, all right, but they don't want to destroy it. One historian described prophets, I thought was a really good description of it, that within your organization, the prophet, whoever plays that role, it's an early warning system. They're an early warning system when your church is getting too far to the cliff and about to fall off. And if you heed their warning and follow the solution they provide, you won't fall off the cliff. All right? They always want to reform the system from within. Let's talk about compensation package for you, those of you applying for the prophet position, okay? Compensation and benefits. Absolutely nothing. You're going to get nothing if you apply and get this job here at St. Luke, all right? Or unless you already have it. In fact, you get worse than nothing. As Jesus will say, you're going to get persecuted. Your voice is going to be silenced. People will ignore you. They might just kick you out of the church, okay, because they don't like what you have to say and your crazy ideas. And Jesus says this over and over again. The reason I read today's gospel to you is that Jesus is saying, look what you did to your prophets. You killed them between the temple and the altar. You flogged them. You stoned them. We get rid of our prophets because they're different. They are the other. When we want to split, they say stay together and reform from within. We don't like our prophets. That's what we do. We want to silence their voice. And so when I asked the original question, I said, who here plays the prophetic role here at St. Luke? Everybody's like, you're looking around like, I don't know. Right? Of course not. Churches have very effectively, we've pushed our prophets out. All organizations do this. Okay, Jesus said it in the gospel, he says it here in the Beatitudes, right? We get rid of our prophets because we just can't stand. They have a crazy idea and they're telling us we have to reform and change, that we have to stick together. We don't like it, okay? Modern day prophets, let's talk about them. We'll do one here, okay, for time purposes. Viktor Frankl, I guess by show of hands, does anybody here know Viktor Frankl? 2, excellent. Anybody else? Actually, was that 3? June, did you know? Okay, so I have 3. Okay, that's good. I think, now let's real quick, I want to compare this. Who here knows Dietrich Bonhoeffer? A lot more. And this is interesting that we value our martyrs. We love people that sacrifice themselves for a cause. But our prophets, history ignores these people, okay? Viktor Frankl is really interesting. He was a doctor in Austria during the Second World War. His lives in a small village. He's Jewish. His community turns him in and his family to the Nazis. He's sent to Dachau. His wife with him, along with his immediate family. His wife is murdered in the camps. He loses his father and his mother and his brother. Okay, he survives. He gets out of the camp weighing less than 100 pounds. Returns home to the very home where he was turned in by the community, and he begins a lifelong work of promoting absolute forgiveness, absolute pardons of everybody who participated in the crimes of the Holocaust. No justice, no trials, no punishment, just complete pardon, complete forgiveness. Because he says that's the only way you're going to heal the wounds. How do you think that one went over in post-World War Germany? Yeah. Like even today, there is this strong desire, justifiably so, for retribution and punishment against those people who participated in great evil. And his argument was, you forgive. Because of this, this man was called a Nazi sympathizer, a Holocaust denier. Now think about that, right? A Holocaust denier. The guy who lived through it, suffered at the hands of great evil, lost his wife, his immediate family, and we're going to say he's denying the existence of the Holocaust. Do you see how we persecute prophets? Because we don't want to engage in blanket forgiveness, right? No. They have to be punished. This is really interesting. I think it was June. My wife, she teaches adult Sunday school on the second Sunday of every month over at her church. That's why many times Terry covers me on the second Sunday, because I watch the kids. And she was doing a lesson on forgiveness. And I said, well, talk about Viktor Frankl in your Sunday school lesson, okay? And I told her that story. She went and she offered the whole thing I just did here, absolute forgiveness, even the people who commit great evil against you. She came home and I said, hey, how did it go? Like, how did my idea work? And I got this look, like, never offer me an idea for my Sunday school lesson ever again. Okay, I'm guessing there was a riot, okay? And this is just like a month ago. All right, and she said, somebody stood up as soon as I mentioned this guy about forgiving great evil and said, well, he's wrong. I guess this woman was just absolutely adamant. She's like, you can't forgive that. He's in the wrong. Think about that, right? That's what the woman, she said, you can't forgive that type of evil. He's wrong for even advocating that type of level of forgiveness. This is what we do to the prophets, guys. We don't like their message, right? Interestingly enough, his neighbor who helped turn him in was a Catholic priest, okay? After he got out of the Holocaust, even though he's a Jew, he went and purposely attended the Mass every Sunday, okay, to show respect to that man. And the priest said in his memoir, he said, I never knew what true forgiveness was until Viktor came back and sat in the pew alone and came up at the end of the Mass and thanked me. Knowing what I had done, he said, I never knew what true forgiveness looked like until that moment. He had been a priest his whole life, and he never knew what true forgiveness looked like. Okay? This is the power of prophets, guys. All right? And we persecute them. We don't want to think about them. All right? Seek out and find prophets. Your group's success really hinges on having this particular function fulfilled. Okay? And churches, we've done a bad job at it, okay? And one of the reasons we've done a bad job at it is you can see the proof of it in the modern American church landscape, okay? And 2 weeks ago, we were playing trivia at the breakfast, and I asked the question, I said, how many churches are in Chancellor Township? And Phil, you answered, and it was the most, it was just elegant in its simplicity. Do you remember what you said? Too many. When I said, how many churches are in Chancellor Township? You said, too many. All right, that is, I wish I could be that beautiful in my speech, right? So simple, right? That sums it all up. Too many. It is absolutely true, right? How do we get too many churches? Okay, well, ever since the Reformation, we've been in a constant cycle of division. We just keep breaking apart. That's what churches do. Okay? That's what Protestant churches especially do, right? We disagree on this issue, so we break apart and start a new church, right? This family can't get along with this family, right? They got some bad blood dating back to 1864. Break apart, start your own church. Okay? They say trespasses, we say debtors. We can't agree on that. Let's split apart, right? I just don't like that person. I'm going to go start my own church. This is the constant cycle of what churches do, okay? It's tribalism. And Protestant churches are very guilty of what we call tribalism. All right, and it's very what does a tribe do when we have members in the tribe that don't agree with us or that we're having problems with? We don't try and reform it from within or keep it together. We say, go start your own tribe. That's what we do. That's tribalism. That's the definition of it, okay? And so what's happened, the reason you have too many churches, all right, is because everybody just kept splitting apart because nobody had a prophet that would have said, reform the system from within. We forget that there were 12 tribes of Israel that came together under one God, right? Because they listened to a prophet. See, this is the problem, okay? We don't have this role fulfilled anymore. My hope is we can start to actually think about this role. I was putting this message together. I thought about some of you. Some of you have the prophetic tendencies. You're quiet about it because you don't want to get persecuted, okay? There's some people not sitting here who have been a part of the church. They just don't want to come back because they're afraid, okay? Maybe they know they have ideas, but they feel like, man, nobody respects my ideas. Okay, so there's people in this congregation who play this role. I can think of them. I'm hoping you're thinking of them too. They may not hit all the marks, but they have prophetic tendencies. We have to learn to cultivate this role. This is the third wheel in a church. And if you want to have a balanced church, you have to have the prophet role fulfilled, all right? Next week, we're going to talk about leadership. I'm very excited about it. I like talking about leadership. Okay, so I'm hoping it'll be a fun message. The final week is going to be about the people of a church. And I know what all of you are thinking. He's just going to tell us to give more and do more. In no way is that going to be what I'm asking you to do. In fact, it'll be a unique perspective at the roles and responsibilities of people in church. And I'm hoping by the end you have this kind of unique idea of how all this works together to make a well-balanced, very efficient, well-running church. Okay? Amen.